Begin the current Daf Mesechtes Kidushin Daf Ches. Begin 10 lines down at the top of the Yamid, but the Gemara continues regarding the halachas of the kinyanim of Eved Ivri, Amavriya, which was the theme of the second mission of our parak. Again, we spoke about who Isha Niknis, a woman is acquired, which is, although we call it Kidushin, which is the topic of this Masechta, but it's an actual type of an acquisition, which a human being is being acquired. And then we go on to the next mission, which was the second mission regarding an Eved Ivri, also as a Jewish person being acquired, and Agmar continues regarding the kinyanim of that Eved Ivri. She's concept by Kazik and Cheskel turned up Daf joins today's Daf. Some discussing today's Daf are Yiyud, which is the halacha that an Amavriya who sold can be engaged by the master or his son due to the fact that she was sold to them as the Amavriya. The Gemara has a question: if Eres and Isa and Yisun Isa, what does Yiyud do? Does it make it like an engagement, or does it make it like halachic marriage? And the Gemara gets into a discussion regarding Nimke v'Nishna, regarding could the girl be sold and then could she be betrayed upon again? Because the Gemara is going to get into all machlekes regarding selling after getting engaged, or getting engaged after selling, or selling after selling. I mean, the father's rights in his daughter once he already sold her once. That the theft that the ganav he gets sold for should correlate to the amount that he's worth, which is, we know that if the ganav, that's the halacha of machur bezdin, that if he can't afford the theft, so they sell him as a slave. The question is, what happens if he's worth more than what he stole, or what happens if he's worth less? The Gemara discusses that. Niftis bal karchai, regarding the ability to force redemption from the owner. Regarding selling his daughter either for marriage or for slavery. And what do we give primacy for the way something is read, or for the way it's written in the pasuk, or for the way how it's read? So begin the current Daf Ches, 10 lines down at the top of the Yamid. The Gemara continues with the halachas of the Eved Ivri. Yesh be'ivri she'im be'ivriya. There are, especially because the halach of our Mishnah said the different ways that you could acquire the Eved Ivri and how he could acquire himself back. We said that the Amavriya has that and more. Yes, Allah of Amavriya. So the Gemara brings a brisa that it relates to that idea. That yesh be'ivri she'im be'ivriya. There are halachas that apply to the Jewish slave that don't apply to the Jewish maidservant. Yesh be'ivri she'im be'ivri, and there are halachas that apply to the Jewish maidservant that don't apply to the Jewish slave. What is that? So the brisa explains. Yesh be'ivri, you have by the Jewish slave, shu yetz b'shanim. He can go out either when it's the end of 6 years, uba yevel, or when it's the yevel year, uba misa adan, or when the master dies. Masha'en kein be'ivriya, which does not apply by the Jewish maidservant, which the Gemara is going to ask what are you talking about. All these ways apply by the Amavriya too. But that's what the Brisa says. And then the yesh be'ivriya is what applies to the Amavriya, what is not by the Eved Ivri, sharei Avriya yetze b'semanim. She goes out when she develops the signs of puberty, and ve'eininim keres v'nishnes, she cannot be sold and then sold again, which Gemara later on is going to learn the source for that halacha. And numaftin oisa bal karchai, they could redeem her against his will. The Gemara is going to explain what is this halacha. Mashen came b'ivri, which does not apply by the Eved Ivri. So that's what the Brisa says. Certain things apply to the Ivri, not by the Vriya. Some things by the Vriya, not by the Ivri. I'm not. The Gemara now explains this Brisa. Amamar. The time of the Brisa said, Yesh be'ivri, she'im be'vriya. These ways that the Eved Ivri goes free with Shanim and Yovel and Misa Adan don't apply to the Amavriya. Says Gemara, a minute. That seems to be contradicting from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, after it talks about the ways that the Eved Ivri goes out, it says Yeseir alav Amavriya. And more than this, it applies to the Jewish maidservant. Shekoin hatzim b'simana, she requires herself with signs of puberty. So obviously, all those ways that Ivri goes out does apply to the Vriya. She actually even has more than that. So what do you have to say in these by the Ivri, that not by the Vriya? So on that Rav Sheshis, he says, the Bryce is talking about Kegoin Shia Ada. We're talking about that the Ada and the master already married her with the halach of Yiyud, that's in the rights of the other to do to the Amavriya. So you're right, now this Ivriya is not going out anymore at the end of 6 years, or Yovel Mrs. Adan. She only goes out with a get. So yes, these ways of the Ivri going out would not apply to the Ivriya. Says the Gemara, Yada, they did Yiyud, so Pshita, Gita Baya. Of course then you need a get. She's like she's like a regular wife. Says Gemara, no. Ma'odetema, what would you say? And that's the chiddush that we needed from the Brisa. You would have thought to say, lo levat lehilchas amina. She doesn't lose the halachas of Amavriya. If she wants to, she could go out with one of these ways without a get, and that would also apply. Mrs. Adnan. Yeah. Unless the yud was done with the son. But Al Kapanim, Kamash Mulan, that's the chiddush that was saying that no, she totally eradicates the halacha of Amavriya, and now she's like a regular wife. So Gemara says, if that's the case, wait a second. You told me the second half of the teaching was that certain things apply by the Vriya that don't apply by the Ivri. Amai Yetze b'Simanim. Then why is the Sefer saying, if Vriya has more than the Ivri, she goes out with Simanim? Not true. She's a wife now. A wife doesn't, when she reaches puberty, go out from the marriage. Says the Bryce in the Sefer was saying, if there's no Yid, then Yetze Ab b'Simanim. Then she goes out. Meaning, besides the Shanim and the Yovel and the Mrs. Adad, she will have one over the Ivri that she'll go out also with Siman. Okay, now the Brisa said also, she's not sold and then sold again. Now, Machlal, the inference is, because this is one of the things we were saying that the Ivriya has over the Ivri, that the Eved Ivri Nimka V'Nishna, that the Jewish slave could be sold and sold again. Now, sold is the halacha. What do you mean he's sold? The sold is the halacha that he didn't have what to pay up. That's the halacha machru bezin, so the courts they sell him. Is that true that the Ilma Avriya cannot be sold again, but the Ivri could be? But Vatanya in the Brisa that it says in the pasuk in Shemais, it says that im ain lo, if the guy doesn't have how to pay up, so he sold bignei vasai for his theft. What does it mean he sold for his theft? His theft is coming to exclude other things. His theft, meaning, if let's say he has enough to pay up the principal. No, we know the halacha is that if a ganav is found with the theft in his possession, we penalize him and say, you have to pay double the amount. So the pasuk is teaching us that if he just can't pay the kefil, the doubling, he won't be sold for that. He'll only be sold for the theft itself. And also, B'gnei Vasa teaches you, not if it's with hazama, meaning if let's say he testified regarding his friend that he stole. Really, he was a shakran and he was huzam, and he doesn't have how much to pay for that amount of what he accused someone else of the theft. For that, he won't be sold. It's only for his theft and not for his zamamai. And B'gnei Vasa teaches you also for his theft is pamachas. Once he sold one time, shuv then you cannot sell him another time. So the Gemara at this point assumes what it means to say is is that he sold one time and not two times. He sold bignei vasai for his theft in the singular. You only sold one time and not a second time. Hey, didn't you tell me that that's what the Ivriya has over the Ivri, that she cannot be sold a second time? But it sounds like the Ivri also has that halacha, that bignei vasai, you could sell him only one time and not two times. Amar Rabbi says, like Kasha, it's not difficult, because it depends. Kan bignei achas. If there was one theft, one time, and he's not worth the amount of his entire theft, so he's not sold because of half the theft, and that when he goes out, he'll be sold for the other half. But Kan, when did we say that the inference of was from the Ivriya, that she's not sold twice, but the Ivri would be sold twice? Is b'shtei genevos, is by two different thefts. So like Rashi explains, even if they didn't have the court case yet until he already stole by both of them, and he's not worth but according to the value of one theft, yeah, he'll be sold and then he'll be sold again. Because each and every one individually you could call them v'nimke bignei vasai. So it's not a difficulty. Depends on the context. Could he be sold and then sold again? The inference of Ivriya versus every sound like yeah. This price that we just quoted, v'nimke bignei vasai, sounds like not. Well, depends for what. If it's for one theft, the guy's worth only $50,000, but he made a heist of $100,000. So the Nipke Bignei Vasa teaches you cannot be sold and sold again. You're sold for the value of what you stole. You're not worth it? Sorry, then you're not sold. It's not an option for us to try to get the money back. But if you're worth $50,000 and two separate times you went in with a string and you were able to steal the diamonds and pull it out, and you got 50K, and then a different guy, you went to the store next door and you went and you stole 50K, then you will be sold 2 times, because those are each independently v'nimka b'gnevasai. Each one will be the value of your geneva for how much you're worth. So therefore, it's not a contradiction.
What happens to him?
The one who did so he has to pay what he tried to do.
Over time.
However we're going to get money. If you can't be sold, then whatever it is, whenever you'll get money, you'll get money. If you don't have, then the chapter 11. You know what I'm saying? It's not a new thing. So the Gemara has a problem with this, with Rava's answer. Amalei Abaya said, Bignevasai, and this is Taisis Rashi over here. There's different Girsois in Rashi, but the simple understanding is from this next Gemara. So Abaya says, Bignevasai tuva mashma. What does that mean? Meaning, if a guy had, if he stood for both of these thefts in one court case, so it all sounds like it's bignevasai, like it says a pasuk in Yoina ubehema rabba. So although it's saying in the singular of a hadaga shabiyar, it says like one fish, but obviously it's referring to many. And even so, that it tells us only one v'nimkar. V'nimkar is one time being sold, bignevasai. So the Gemara's question is, Abaye finds this difficult in how to understand Rabba's answer, that he's saying that for one theft, okay, then you can't be sold and sold again. But for 2 different thefts, oh, okay, you'll be sold again. Abaye says, doesn't sound like that. It sounds like that v'nimkar is going to be one time being sold. Even though bignevasai is singular, I could show you plural means singular. You find behema rabba, bedoga, it's singular, even though it's referring to plural. So the way Rashi, again, the way the girsa we have in Rashi is that yeah. So then it's not true. Bignevasai should tell us even then you're only allowed to be sold nimker one time. You're answering me, telling me that when could you do from the dik, from Ivri or over Ivri? That the Ivri is not going to be sold and sold again, but Ivri will be sold and sold again. It's talking about when there's 2 different thefts. Each one is worth his value, then they can be sold 2 times. Not true. So by the pasuk could still be interpreted, and it would sound like the v'nimkar, which is one time being sold, is bignevasai, although that sounds like that his theft at one time. It's not true. One can mean many. That's the way. Right. That's what I'm saying. V'nimkar sounds like it's one time. V'nimkar, he sold bignevasai, and not sold many times. That's what it sounds like. That v'nimkar. I hear you want to say that. Why can't v'nimkar? I hear v'nimkar, and he sold bignevasai. Yeah, you have to know. Tais has all arichas over here. Yeah, but that's how I would say. I hear the question. Why can v'nimkar bignevasai? How would you even say it in the plural? Maybe you would say it differently. V'nimkar. Al kaponim. That's a biased question. He says bignevasai sounds like a lot, and v'nimkar is one time. So then you're back to the question. It sounds like that you're not sold more than one time. So Elam Abaye says a different answer. He says leikasha. It's not a difficulty. He says kan. Here, the second teaching was ba'adam echad. If he stole from one person, and he stood in court in one time, so he's not going to be sold and sold again, even for many thefts, because that's similar to one. Because the pasuk utilizes it in the singular terminology. But Khan in the first teaching was b'shnei b'nei adam, by 2 different people who take him to court 2 times. Then he'll be sold for each one individually, and the same thing would be if he stole and he had a court case and then was sold, and then he stole again when he went free, he would go back and be sold again. So that's the teaching, says Abaye, that Khan ba'adam echad, he can't be resold for a single theft or even many thefts from the same person if they're all judged together. That's by adam echad. That's v'nimkar bignevasai. But Khan b'shnei b'nei adam, he may be sold again to repay a theft from a second person or a second time from the same person, it's considered as an independent v'nimka b'gnei vasa. That's how Abaye says it, and that's in contrast to Amavriya. Amavriya will never be sold again, and therefore that's what we said, the Yesh Bevriya versus the Ivri. The Ivri, yes, v'nimka b'gnei vasa teaches me by Adam Echad, but you could have a case that he'll be sold again if he steals another time, he's let out of jail, and he steals again, he'll be sold again. So therefore, that's what we're referring to, that he could be sold again. Now, a related discussion regarding this idea that we mentioned before, that v'nimka b'gnei vasa is that he's only sold for his theft, and he cannot be sold again. Like we said, if let's say the theft was 100,000, he's only worth 50 for 6 years, and then he has to be sold again. That we said no, that's not going to work. So the Gemara, the Brisa discusses the details of that halacha. Tell him Marlina Brisa. Geneva Elef. Let's say he stole something worth 1,000, but v'shava chamesh meis, he's only worth 6 years of work. He's only worth 500. So nimka v'chayz v'nimka. So it says the Tana Kama. Okay, we sell him. He's worth 500. Then we sell him again. Now Geneva chamesh meis. Let's say he stole 500 worth. V'shava elef. He's worth 1,000. So if you're going to sell him for the 6 years of an Ebed Ivri, it's going to be double the amount of how much he stole. And nimka klal. Then he's not sold at all. He must discuss this in a second. He says, if the theft was exactly the value of how much he sold for, not less, not more, then nimka, then he sold. But vimlav, if not, if it's too much or too little, then the nimka is not going to be sold. So Rabbi says, in this case, Rabbi Lazar could open up his mouth and he could win this machlokes that he has with Rabbanan. Why? Rabbi Lazar said it's across the board. Can't be more, can't be less. Because the ma'ishno gnei b'chamesh meis v'shava elef, what's the difference between the case when he steals 500, that is worth 1,000, that the Tanakam agrees, the Rabban agreed to Rabbi Lazar, that the ein nimka is not going to be sold. Why not? Why can't it be sold? Because the nimka kula yomer chamana v'lei chetziyai. The Torah tells us nimka b'gnei basim. Nimka means he's sold and not half of him, which in this case he's worth the amount he's going to be sold for 6 years worth, double the amount how much he stole, and he's only should be working half. So you can't sell him if he's worth 1,000 and he only stole 500. The Rabban agree, and they said he can't be sold.
I mean, little words, you could argue the other way too. It doesn't matter. We could semantic play the other way. He's sold for his theft, period, regardless of his value.
Meaning to say, even if he's worth 1,000,
Right.
but then he's not being sold only for Gnei Vasa, he's being sold for something else.
What is he being sold for?
Well, he's worth 1,000, and now he's only owes 500. Right? Yeah, you have to know. You have to know exactly how to translate exactly all these words, how specific, and what's the understanding of it. But al kapanim, that's how they come understand. V'nimka b'gnei vasa, only b'gnei vasa, like we say, v'lei b'kfeiloi, v'lei b'zmamai. So if you're worth 1,000, you're not being sold for your gnei, you're being sold for something else. So therefore says Rab. Right. If you know what the margin of error is, the right, yeah. Bal kapanim, there's a lot of things in the Torah like that. How many times did they execute someone? So you get all the different details and whatever. Was there ever machru bezdin? Was there ever you could have every guy sells himself? Was there ever machru bezdin? Did you ever have such a thing that is exactly worth? You have to know what that means. But achinami here also nimka b'gnei basim rachmana. So says Rabbi. So Rabbi Lazar would say, how could you Rabbana have a double standard? The same thing is then you translated nimka b'gnei basim. Torah says nimka b'chatzi gnei basim can't be sold for half of his theft. In other words, the same play on words like you're saying that nimka b'gnei basim, that you can only be sold for the theft and not for something more than that. So then also on nimka b'gnei basim v'le b'chatzi gnei basim. If you're worth 500 and you stole 1,000, how could you tell me that you're sold and then you're sold again to make up 500 times 2? But that's being sold for chatzi gneva, not for all gneva. And therefore, says Rabbi Lazar would seem to win this fight and say, no, it can't be more, it can't be less. It's only if you're worth the exact amount, then it's gneva. Now, one of the other teachings that we mentioned in the Brisa was that we have by the Ivriya over the Ivri was that umaftin oisa bal karchai. We could redeem the Amavriya against his will, which does not apply to the Ivri. So it says the Rabbi thought to say, what does this mean about karchai the other? It means to say, who do you usually forcibly redeem someone from? The Amavriya, when they want to buy her back, they could force him to take the money to get her back free. And then Abaye says, wait a second, my niu. In other words, how are you having Bal Karcha by the Ivriya more than the Ivri? If it's to say that if they don't have money to pay out, right, because the Ivri we know has also could redeem himself out. So what he's saying the Ivriya has forcibly against his will that the Ivri doesn't have, if you think it means to say the Chasavna Leishtara Adame, that we're just going to write a document on her monetary value and that she'll give it to him when she could afford it, Amai, where do you get this from? He's naked marginasa biyadei. He's holding a pearl in his hand, meaning her body is indebted to him, and we're gonna yehivna lechaspa. We're gonna give him a shard, like an earthenware shard, like a piece of paper. Well, why would we say such a thing that she could just write him an IOU? Why would we do such a thing? Abai says balkarche de av. It means actually we thought. Rava thought it meant balkarche of the adain. No, says Abai, it means balkarche of the av. If the father has money now, I mean, he sold his daughter, he had no money. He says, Shefala, I can't, the family needs, I'm going to sell you Zalmavriya. Then he finally hits pay dirt, and suddenly he has money. Oh, then we force him to redeem her. And the reason is because of this disgrace to the family, that here there's one of the girls in the family as a maidservant, so we force him, the father, to redeem her. So the Gemara says, wait a second, if that's the halacha of Bal Karchai, ihachi eved brinami. The same halacha should apply that a Jewish slave, that you have this 18-year-old guy who's a slave for some neighbor. You should force the family members because of the disgrace to the family that the Stinkovitz family has one guy who was a slave working for someone in the other side of town. So why is it only for the Amavriya? Says no, because because he's going to rely on this. And he's going to continuously sell himself. Like people say, he's got to hit rock bottom. He's got to get out of this because we're going to keep on bailing him out. He's going to go and he's going to sell himself out again. So there's no point in that. So the Gemara says, so wait a second. So the same thing is also over here. The father is also going to go and then resell her again. So what's the difference? Says Gemara, no, but Hakatani we learned, which was one of the other things that the Ivriya has, that the Ivri doesn't have, is eininim keres v'nishnas. She cannot be sold and then sold again. So yes, there is a point about forcing him to redeem her, because he cannot just resell her, and therefore that's the difference between Ivriya and Ivri. And says Gemara, Amani. Now, once we just mentioned that halacha, which was related to one of the other things, who is the Tana of this Bryce that says that the girl cannot be sold and sold again? Reb Shimon, which actually gets us into a whole conversation. What does it mean it's Reb Shimon? The Tana like learn the Bryce. Tanakama says, a man could sell his daughter for marriage and then do it again. Meaning, he could accept Kidushin for her, and if, let's say, she gets widowed or divorced from eirisin, from engagement, he could go and get her engaged to someone else, and he gets to keep the money of the Kidushin if she has not yet become a begeres. She didn't get married, she got engaged, and she's not yet a begeres. So he could get her engaged and do it again. So to l'shifches v'shayna, he could sell her at, let's say, age 4, and she can go out 6 years later at age 10, or let's say by yovel, or with the death of the master, and she's still a minor, she's 10 years old. He can go and sell her again. But if she went out with simanim, if that's why she left the first time shifches, because she became a 12-year-old girl, then obviously he wouldn't be able to resell her, because even if he had never sold her and she brought simanim of puberty, he cannot sell her. As the Brisa teach in Erchin, you would think you could sell your daughter when she's a naira. On that you can say no. If she's even sold already, she goes out when she becomes a naira. Now that she's not sold, for sure you cannot sell in the first place. But if she went out in any other ways, this is adain or sheish or yavel, and she's still ketana, you could sell her again as a maidservant. And
they can only say by Kidushin she can go out if she's for any reason before she's a begeres.
Go out from the marriage. That's when she's a katana. when she's a minor, and the
She
father
can be
didn't
sold.
and the father didn't marry her off. Her brother and her mother, which only rabbinic Kidushin did it. Then there's Allah of miyun. When the father
Even if
does, she can't.
doesn't, she can be sold a second time. They will keep Kidushin.
Say it again. Even if
The
what?
father. You're saying what's stopping the father from selling her? You're saying the brothers did it, not the father.
For miyun, yeah. For miyun is the brothers and the mother. Right. That's by marriage. Right. And another thing says the Tanna Kama, you could also do the ishus achashiv, because here it gets a little bit complicated. That if he could accept the kedushin of his daughter after he had sold her as a maidservant. So let's say he sold her as a maidservant at age 5, and then Yabel came at age 7. Now when she's 8, he can go and get her engaged to someone else because she's still under his jurisdiction. You could do ishus achashivchas. Avoloi, but one thing out of the 4 you can't do, leila shivchas acha ishus. If let's say he had accepted kedushin from her, and then she came back to him because let's say she got widowed after Kedushin. He cannot go now and sell her as a shivcha. Then more later on is going to learn what's the source for that halacha. That's the Tanna Kama. Shimon Aimer, and this is what we wanted. We wanted Reb Shimon to show this halacha that he holds that the girl cannot be sold and sold again. The Tanna Kama says she could be. Shimon holds you cannot be. He says no. Just like the Tanna Kama agrees. You cannot sell his daughter for slavery after he had already gotten her engaged to a certain man. So too, you're not allowed to sell your daughter for slavery after she had already been a slave. So there we see Reb Shimon is this opinion that we were looking for, that was said that the Ivriya has over the Ivri that she's ein nimka b'chayziv nimka. Now, once we mentioned that machlekes, the Gemara says ubeplukta down the Tanoi that actually the machlekes to Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon would be related to the drushes of the psuk of the pasuk that there's a machlekes of Lazar and Reb Kiva. Not exactly line for line; they're not the same exact, but it's related to that machlekes. The time like learn the brayso. Pasuk says in Shemais, where the pasuk says, if let's say it was bad in the eyes of her master that he didn't do yud to her, and then they would do redemption. So the pasuk says, la'am nachri, to a foreign nation lo yimshol, he should not dominate lamacher to sell her. Bevigdoiva, in his being a traitor to her. Now, it's not clear how to translate this pasuk. Who is it talking about? Is it talking about the father? Is it talking about the master? But one thing he definitely is talking about this girl, this Amavriya, that once she was sold and no one did yud for her, or did yud, it's not clear how to translate it, but the point is that subsequently, to another nation, meaning to another person, they can't be traitors to her now and like sell her now. That's what the pasuk says. Bivig deba. Now, what does this mean? So as we continue to Beis, the Gemara translates the first opinion says, Kibin sheperes talisa aleha. Once he spread out his cloak over her, shuv en rashay lemachra. So then he can't sell her anymore. Divrei bekiva. So what does this mean? So Rashi in the Ramaskal Am Nachri explains. You have to translate the pasuk like this. What does it mean? La'am nachri la'yim shalamachraba means to say for shifchas, for slavery. Lo yimshal, who cannot be yimshal? The father cannot be dominating her anymore to sell her. Why? Because me'achas shepiris talisa yoleha, like the words of Rebbe Kiva are. What does that mean? Meaning once the Adon, the master, spread his cloak over her, meaning he married the Amavriya for the purposes of Yiyud, that's Bevigdaiba, that's his beged, his talis. If he divorces her with a get and she goes back to her father, the father cannot anymore sell her as a slave woman. That's how you have to translate the pasuk. There's a little bit of a detail over there, but that's what it means. That's what we said. La'am nachri means for slavery. La'yimshol, who is the father, la'machar, to sell her for slavery. Bevigdai ba, once the Adon had already put his garment, his talis over her, he did yud, and now she's going free because let's say he died or whatever, or divorced her. Now the father cannot anymore sell her for slavery, which is the halacha of ein shivchus achar ishus. But if let's say he didn't do yud, the Adon, and she went out, let's say after 6 years or whatever, and she goes back to the father, then the father could go and sell her again. That's what you see from Rabbi Kiva, because they're only seeing Achar Ishus. Well, first of all, those are the words of Rabbi Kiva. He says, Kivin Shapirus Talisi Allah, the top line of the Amid. Once the Adon, it's not clear how to translate, Rashi tells us how to translate. Once the Adon puts his cloak, which is a euphemism for being intimate with her, which was Yiyud, so then Shuv in Rishon Lamachar, the father cannot sell her anymore, and that's what Rashi tells us how to translate the pasuk. La'am nachri, to foreign people, la'yim shalamacher, the father cannot dominate the seller as a maidservant. Bevigdai ba, once the Adon had put his bagged on her, which was Ishus, now the father cannot do shivchas. So you can't do shivchas acha Ishus. But if, let's say, he didn't do Ishus, would be inferred. If, let's say, she had only been a shivcha, then the father could sell her again, which would be, you could do shivchas acha shivchas. Says Rashi, that's like the Rabbanan that we mentioned in the previous machlekes with Rabbi Shimon, that they said that you can't do shivchas acha ishus, like over here, once you have kiyada, once there's yud, there's ishus, you can't do mechir anymore, but for shivchas acha shivchas, that you could do. That's the way the Rabbanan were in the previous machlekes. Now, the next opinion says, Rabbi Lazar, he says, no, a different translation. He says, bevigdoi ba means something different. Kivin shabogad ba. Once he was a traitor to her, meaning to his own daughter. So it's not clear who bevigdoi ba is going on and how do you even translate it. But the word could obviously be the word beged, which is garment. It could also be begida, which means as a traitor. Kivin shabogad ba. Once he was a traitor to his own daughter that he sold her as a maidservant. Shuv in rasha lamachra. So then he cannot sell her anymore, la'am nachri, which is shivchas. So this Joe, who is a traitor to his daughter, cannot anymore sell her as a shivcha again. But for shivchas acher ishus, if let's say he had just done Kidushin to his daughter, he could then sell her. You don't see that, you can't do that, because that's not a traitor. So that he could go ahead and sell her. So Rashi explains, so it's not exactly line for line that Rebbe Lazar is like Rebbe Shimon and that the Tanakama, Rebbe Kiva is like the Rabbanan. Rashi explained to Rebbe Shimon, he darshans the pasuk like Rebbe Lazar, that once the father, this Joe was a traitor on his daughter, that he sold her as a shivcha, that he cannot sell her anymore as a shivcha, which was like where Rebbe Lazar said it, Kivin shabagad ba, shuv in Rishon, because he's learning Bevigdei ba is the father, was a traitor. He cannot sell her anymore. But he also darshans it like Rabbi Kiva, of the Kivin Shapiris Talisa Laha, which is the halacha of Ishus, that the Adon had done. Loim Kireni cannot sell her. And that's why he holds both. Rabbi Shimon holds, you can't do Shivchas Acha Ishus, and you cannot do Shivchas Acha Shivchas, because he holds both drashas, which is very interesting how he could do both. He's learning Bevigdei ba, both going on the Adon of a beged, of being married, and of Bogad ba, of the father. He's learning both drashas in the pasuk, and tell me you can't do Shivchas Acha Ishus, and you can't do Shivchas Acha Shivchas.
Where do you find such a similar, version of the word two ways?
Right, so actually the Gemara is going to discuss that in a moment, in a related vein. But first, the Gemara says, the Gemara says, okay, what is this machlekes that Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Kiva have, which we're saying is the machlekes Reb Shimon and the Rabbanan, which is that's the Reb Shimon we were looking for, who said that one of the things that Ivriya has over Ivri is that she cannot be sold and sold again. So the Gemara explains. Rebbe Lazar Sava, he holds, yesh aim le'misoiches. We give primacy for the tradition, I'm not going to sing that word, but for the tradition, how it's written in the Torah. Which is, Tais has a whole arichis over here on Rashi. What are you talking about? We don't write the way Rashi's saying in the Torah, but the way Rashi says it is that it's written Beis Gimel Dal Vav. Now, it doesn't have a Yud over there. Beis Yud Gimel Dal Vav. So, you're not enunciating a chirik without a Yud. So the Nakuda that's going to be beneath the second Beis is going to be oftentimes in place of a yud. Bevigdoi is how we read it, as if there's a chidik, as if there's a yud there. Bevigdoi. But according to how it's written, you really should read it with a, Rashi calls it a chat of comments, well known that means a patach, bevagdoi, which is a terminology, a begida, of being a traitor. So Rebbe Elazar holds the primary is how it's written. How is it written? It's written without a yud. So that's bevagdoi, which being a traitor. Rabbi Kiva holds no yeshem lemikra. We give primacy for how something is read, and how do we read it? We read it bevigdoi, which is like v'tis paseyu bebigdoi by Eshet Paitifa. That means a garment. So therefore, that's the machlekes. How are you going to translate it? Is it talking about the Adon having done yud, which is his beged, or is it going to be about the father that did a shivchis, cannot do shivchis again because it's with his bogad, because it's bevagdoi? And Reb Shimon Saver, and this is going to answer your question that you asked, Yashem lemikra u'lemesayres. We give primacy for both. There's importance for how it's written, there's importance how it's read. And therefore we're going to darshan both of them. When the father was a traitor, did shivcha, and when the Adin had done yud, which is beged. Now Rashi has a difficulty with this. He says because the Gemara in Sanhedrin, by the drasha basukas, which is written, the word basukas 3 times. 1 time it's written with vavs, which is plural. 2 times it's written without, just samach chav saf. So that goes into the discussion: how many walls do you have to have? Because we count up how many times it says basukas. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to have 4 walls, 3 walls, 2 and a little bit. But the Gemara within says, according to Shimon, the yesh im lemikra. We give primacy for how it's read. Basukais is read in the plural. It's written basukas because it doesn't have a vav. But we read it basukais. So wait a second. Why does the Gemara over there say he holds yesh im lemikra? Didn't our Gemara just say that he holds yesh im lemikra and lemesayres? So Rashi says no. Very simply, it's because you can't say both. If it's one, it's not the other. If you're going to say a sukkah is kosher with 4 walls, obviously you cannot darshan how you read it. And if you can say it's puzzle, because you need plural of basukas, then you cannot darshan the way Messiris, the way it's written. So it have to be one or the other. If we have to choose, he was Yashem Lamikra. But here you could have both, and you could eat your cookie too. You could have the Yashem Lamikra, Yeshem Messiris. You could say both drushes of bevigdeba, bevagdeba. So he holds both. You have to choose, then he's going to say Yeshem Lamikra. Now, a related discussion that will relate back to what we were saying. The Gemara says that Boyer Rabba Baravua says Yud, this halacha that we said, if someone says to his Jewish maidservant, you are Yeudali bekesef miknasayich. I'm doing Yud to you with the money that I bought you. Nisua Naisa, does that make marriage? Oh, Erisin Naisa, or does that make Erisin? What's nafkamina? Very simply is regarding Liyarsha, to inherit her, or Tamala, if he can make himself Tamitar when he's a kain and she's being buried, L'hafin the Dereh, and maybe even if he has to be Matam himself to her, L'hafin the Dereh, and to nullify her vows, which only applies when there's Nisuin. Now, when there's Erisin, what's the halacha? Gemara says Tashema, it's being a raya from this brisa that we mentioned before of Rebbe Kiva. What did Rebbe Kiva say? Bevigdeva, that the halacha is that Kivin Shapiris Talise Olah, he reads it from the word of Beged. Once the Adon did his cloak over this Amavriya, we said Shuv Ein Rishon. Okay, the father cannot sell her again. Okay, but that's telling us that means to say the father can't sell her anymore. In other words, if let's say he wants to do Kidushin, not for slavery, that sounds like he could sell her. He just can't sell her as a slave woman. But it sounds like for marriage, he would be able to. Wait a second. If you say you would make marriage, we know the halacha is kivin, and this is once the girl gets married, not engaged, gets married, the father has no more dominion over her, as we find regarding the Darim, that the pasuk removes her from his domain, as it says, V'neda Amana Gerusha, and regarding Yerusha, we find V'yodash Isa, which is the husband inherits the wife. Once there's Nisuin, she's out of her father's domain. Obviously, Erisin Isa, obviously, Yud only makes Erisin because if it made Nisuin, then the diuk that we're making, that because it tells us that the father can't sell her anymore as a maidservant, but the inference is that he can sell her for engagement. How could he do that? She already had Nisuin of the Yud. Obviously, Yud is only Eris and not Nisuin. And that says the Gemara, no. Amr Nachman Yitzchak, he says, Hacha, over here, that we said of Piris Talisoi, that's not going on Yud. When we had learned in Rabbi Kiva's teaching that once he was Piris Talisa Leha, then the father's not allowed to sell her anymore, is actually not going on Yud. It's actually B'Kidushin of the Ketana, the Almakoi in general, that was not sold. And this is what Rabbi Kiva was saying. Once the father gives her over to someone that becomes obligated to feed her, to clothe her, and to give her marital intimacy. In other words, that he gives mekadosh her for ishus, then they cannot sell anymore. So literally, this shivchas acher ishus was not the ishus of Yud, because actually maybe after Yud he actually could you will have a different halacha. Maybe you cannot even marry her off because maybe there's nisuin. This that we've been medayik, that he just can't sell her as a slave woman, but he would be able to get her engaged again, is after a regular kedushin, not after the Yud, because after Yud, maybe, not bring a raya, it would be nisuin and it would not be just kedushin. So the Gemara says, okay, Tashma, let's try to bring a different raya. The Brisa says, ein moichra, the father cannot sell his daughter as a slave woman to relatives, because she's forbidden to them to do Yud, and we need Ashalo Yada, and you can't marry your relative, so we cannot sell her as a maidservant. However, in the name of Rabbi Lezer, they said that Meichel Kravim, she could be sold to relatives, and you don't need to have Yud. When you have it, then the pasuk says it takes effect. When it doesn't, it doesn't. So then he holds you could sell it to relatives. The Shavan, and they both agree, both opinions, Shemachra Aman Lekan Gadol, you could sell, if his daughter is a widow, you could sell her as a maidservant for a kohen gadol, and because kedushin would be taifis, because kedushin takes effect in chiyav alavin, as the Gemara says later on the third paragraph of Samach Chesam and Aleph. So even if Yud would come into the picture, which according to Tanakama you have to have the ability of Yud, which you don't have by relatives, if he said it doesn't work by relatives, but you could sell your daughter as a maidservant, as a widow to the high priest, because if it would happen and he would do Yid, it would take effect. So it is considered Ashalo Ya'ada. And so the Gerusha B'chalutza L'kayin had it. If his daughter was divorced or Chalutza, he could go ahead and sell her as a maidservant to a regular kain. Says the Gemara, wait a second. In this case, as his daughter is a widow, what's the case talking about that she's a widow? Here it gets a little bit complex to understand the case. If she got herself engaged, not through her father, and then she gets widowed from her husband. And now you're saying that the father could go ahead and sell her as a maidservant to a Kohen Gadol. Almana Karila? Wait, you're going to call this girl a widow? You think an 8-year-old girl does something that has halachic relevancy? She can't get herself married. So Belamai, what are you going to say? Elo di Kachavia. Obviously that her father had gotten her engaged. So wait a second. Mi Mazvala? How could he go now and sell her, his daughter, the Almana, as a katana to a Kohen Gadol? But I thought you can't sell your daughter for a maidservant after marriage. So says the Gemara, he says, Hacha b'kedusha Yud. Oh, you know what we're talking about over here? Where she was widowed from the Kidushin of Yud, meaning he had sold her as a maidservant. The Adain had done Yud, and she was widowed from that Yud. Now this that he could go ahead and sell her again, and we're not calling it a problem of shivchas acher ishus, because we're going by libid Rabbi Yehuda, which is, the Amar, he says, the Gemara later on, Daf Yomi Aleph, on the next Daf, he says, Mois HaRishainis, the first monies, there's a lot of details we're saying over here, but the first monies of the purchase, lav the Kidushin nitnu, those were not given for Kidushin, and therefore when the Adain or his son wants to do Yud, it's only in the slavery that they're still remaining that is what the Yid is done with. Now, that Kedushin is not being done through the father. That's Exeris HaKasiv, that could be used for Kedushin. So therefore, that's not him doing Ishas. So therefore, yeah, he could sell her now after that Ishas. That's how the Gemara resolves that teaching. And this was all a whole conversation just to get to our point. But
that's when he can't sell her again. However, if he was a publisher, there was no Begida, then he's allowed to sell.
if he did Kidushin, then right, he held you could do Shifchas Acher Ishus.
So what I asked him here, I look at it, I really say, is
but this is everyone, not just Rabbi Lazar. This is the Rabbanan also that hold that you need to be able to have Yud. Right, that you need to be able to have Yud. So saying, okay, so fine, you'll have Yud with the Kohen Gadol because it's okay, it's Chi B'Lavin, fine. But how do you even have a daughter in Almana that is now being sold? She's a widow, so she was married. Well, if she was married, how could you now, according to the Chacham, go do Shifchas Acher Ishus? So he said, oh, we're talking about Kidushin Yid. So what does that do? Kidushin Yid, it was the father never married her off because it's the remaining monies that the Yid is being done with. It's Xesa Kasa Torah is marrying her off, whatever it is, the other is. And therefore he could go sell it now. Okay, but says the Gemara to answer our question. V'yamin, if you say that Yud is Nisuin, Isa makes Nisuin, so that doesn't make a difference. I don't care if the father didn't do it. We know that halacha kivin this is once she's married, by default, but the father has no more rights in her because she got married. The moment she gets married is like bagras. You just totally move from the father's domain. So who cares that he didn't do it? So the Gemara says, okay, Ve'elamai, so what do you want to tell me? You're trying to prove to me the Erisin Isa, that Yud makes Erisin? But you told me, V'shavin Shamaychra, that everyone agrees that the widow could be sold to the Kohen Gadol as a maidservant. A person cannot sell his daughter for slavery after marriage, even if it was only Erisin. So how are you going to be selling her as a maidservant Acher Ishus? How does that help? She also got engaged. What are you going to say? No, Shani Erisin di Dam Erisin Davia. It's different who if she's getting engaged by herself or the father's getting her engaged. Because since the father was not Makadisha, like we said, it's not the Moiser Rishonis that made the Kidushin. It's like there's another few months left in the contract for the Amavriya, and that remaining monies is what he's doing the Kidushin with. So then, if that's the case, I feel like so then you're going to say that Yud makes marriage. Well, Shani Nisuin the Dam and Nisuin Davia. Then why don't you say the same thing over there? The difference between her marriage or the father marrying her off. Shemar says no. Hi, Mai. What are you saying? That does. And Taisa discusses here Arichas with Rashi, but Bishlama Erisin Shani. I understand that Erisin from the different Erisin are different because you could say that the father is what the pasuk is particular about. That he's not let a sell her after he already had married her off or gotten her engaged. And since the Kidushin, these Kidushin is not what he did. It's not the first monies that he sold her that's making the Kidushin. It's now the other that's doing it. So he was given permission to sell her. But al nisuin and nisuin, as contained top of your Testament Alf, mishani, and that is like Rashi explains, that Taisa elaborates that since the marriage is biblical, and she's totally removed from his domain, so then how would he be able to sell her? Obviously, if the only way we could explain this case of Amalek and Gadol is that he had originally sold her as a shivcha, and then the other had done yiyud, and that's how you could have it that he didn't do it, then obviously it has to be Erison. Because Nisuin, you're out of the picture. So we answered the question, we showed that yiyud is Erison. Now the Gemara just finishes up and says, that he says later on, that a filler be Yehuda is not true. Even according to Yehuda, Mois Yushain is the first monies were the Kedushin Nitnu. They were given for Kedushin. That means to say that this that she was engaged from the Yud was the father's doing. How's he going to explain it? Even if Yud only makes Erison, as we just proved, how could the father now sell this daughter, the Almana, to the Kohen Gadol, but it's Shivchas Acher Ishus? So the Gemara, and that's really what you were saying before, Mukim lo Rebbe Elazar. He'll explain like Rebbe Elazar. The Amar that he says, l'shivchas acha shivchas v'dulei matzim azvala. It's only for a maidservant after a maidservant that he cannot sell her. Al l'shivchas acha ishus, but as a maidservant after marriage, matzim mazvala. And if that's the case, then we're not talking about yud. We're talking about that the father had gotten her engaged to some guy and then he died. She's almana. Oh, you could go ahead and now sell her as a shivcha, as almana to a kohen gadol, because he darshans kivin shebagad ba, which is only once he sold it as a shivcha, he cannot sell the shivcha again. But till now, says Rashi, we were trying to explain it. Not like if you were explaining it, it's very simple. Like you had said, what do you mean? You could do shivchas acharishus, but we didn't want to say like Abelazar because he's a shamuti, which means he was an excommunicated rich taste. Discussed that. Is that really so? There's a different girsa, but upon them, that's another approach you could say that we're going like Abelazar, and then yes, you could do shivchas acharishus. Thank you to any time. Post this.